that is the best way to beat China. We're not going to beat China by becoming China. We're going to beat China by making sure we have the most vibrant, creative, growing economy in human history. And you do it by getting rid of a lot of the idiocy within the federal government.
Hello, welcome again to another episode in the Let People Prosper show. My name is Dr. Vance Ginn. I hope you're having a prosperous day. Well, today I'm delighted to bring on someone who knows a lot about transparency, trying to bring about more transparency within government and really open the books overall. And it's none other than John Hart. John, welcome to the Let People Prosper show.
Thanks, Vance. It's great to be on. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on. I'm excited about our conversation today. Before we get into it, let me go ahead and give your bio for the audience, and then we'll jump right into it. So John Hart is CEO of Open the Books, a veteran of Capitol Hill and the public policy world. He served as the late U.S. Representative and Senator Tom Coburn's, there we go, longtime communications director and co-author. As a leader in Coburn's office, Hart worked with Coburn to help pass landmark transparency legislation that put all federal spending online. He made earmarks like the quote, the bridge to nowhere famous, remember that, and helped secure an earmark moratorium that held for a decade. Hart also helped Coburn achieve the only true year-to-year federal spending reductions, which are 2012 to 2013, since the end of the Korean War. Imagine that. He also is the founder of Mars Hill Strategies, a firm that has advised Silicon Valley companies, numerous nonprofits, and political campaigns. Hart co-authored 2 books with Coburn, Breach of Trust in 2003 and The Debt Bomb in 2012. Hart also runs and operates a 62-acre pre-Civil War era farm in Pleasant Valley region of Maryland, where he lives with his wife and 4 children. So, with all that great stuff going on, John, you're a busy man. You got a lot going on. Let me go ask you the first question I do every guest. Why do you do what you do every day?
Yeah, Vance. Well, again, thanks for having me. So, Open the Books is a first principles organization. And the first principle that I think we both care about a lot is freedom. And freedom is a prerequisite for prosperity. And I think what's lacking in our political discourse today is a grounded understanding of what the Constitution was really written for and what it was designed to protect. And going back, let's just kind of go back way back to social contract theory.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
The idea is that you and I, we give up a little bit of our freedom in order to achieve a net gain of freedom. So we give up a little of our tax dollars, a little of our time, or our creativity in order to get security back from the government. A system of the rule of law where we can trade commerce, where we can have a defense system. Now, the fact is, in today's government, a lot of what government takes actually makes us less free. And so when you think about, and if you've ever studied something called complexity theory, it just studies how complex things emerge from systems. You have to have homeostasis, okay? Things can't be too hot or too cold. We don't want to live in anarchy, right? But you also don't want to live in a situation where the government has so much top-down authority, you can't create and innovate and do anything. You have to have the right amount of kind of heat in the system. And that's what our founders understood. So they were very rooted in these ideas that science has then come and proven some of these concepts out in all kinds of disciplines. And so I'm doing what I'm doing because I think we have to revive kind of a focus on first principles. And transparency is a foundational concept. Transparency was written into the Constitution and it precedes the Bill of Rights. So in Article 1, Section 9, it says that Congress shall make a regular statement of accounts, okay? Now, we'll kind of get into this detail later, but I think we have to ask the question, well, what does regular mean today? If the founders had access to today's technology, I believe they would demand and insist upon real-time transparency. In other words, when money goes out the door, there's no reason really why taxpayers shouldn't see that expenditure. And just as you and I can go and log on to our own personal checking account, a bank account, we ought to see the government's account because it's our money. It's not the government's money.
Amen.
So that's a really key first principle. And then when you have transparency, it precedes the Bill of Rights, right? The freedom of speech. Milton, who influenced the founders, so that whenever truth and falsity are allowed to grapple, whoever knew truth to be penned in a free and open exchange. Well, in order for that grappling and that pluralism system to work, you have to have information. You have to have a reality-based conversation about what government is actually funding, what they're actually doing. So in the public square, transparency is like oxygen. You can't speak if you can't breathe. So Open the Books is really committed to making sure transparency is this first principle. And so anyway, that's a long answer to it, but I'm going to unpack some of that more.
Yeah, definitely. And when did Open the Books start?
So it started about 2012. And just the genesis story is really a beautiful story. Yeah. So you mentioned Tom Coburn. So I worked for Coburn in the House from 97 to 2000. And Coburn was a legendary fiscal conservative. He was a part of the class of 1994. Literally my first week on the job, Sam Donaldson came in to interview Dr. Coburn about his medical practice because the ethics committee was coming after him because they didn't want him to deliver babies and serve in Congress. So he was a true citizen legislator.
Wow.
And he understood, again, this connection, this first principle connection between freedom and the size and scope of government. When we give up freedom, we want to get something back. And as Thomas Jefferson said, the natural order of things is for government to grow and liberty to diminish. So he arrived as a business owner, as a doctor, someone who was grounded, again, in first principles and kind of reality. And so he went through the House, he started to go after earmarks in 1998. And then he saw the class of 1994 kind of go native. And so when he left the House, I helped him write a book called Breach of Trust, How Washington Turns Outsiders into Insiders. And it was really a story about power. And I view politics as the stewardship of power. How do you steward this power so that you do it in the interest of others? And that's what that book was about. So Coburn had this great experience on the Hill. Then when Coburn left in 2000, I worked for Jim DeMint and Steve Largent. We talked about sports before. So a lot of sports. I mean, Steve Largent, a phenomenal guy, great experience for him. So really, just a championship mentality, really great mentor. So I've been very, very blessed to have phenomenal mentors all through my life. And so, Coburn left the House, and then when he got to the Senate, and this background really underscores why transparency was so important to him. When he arrived in the Senate in 2004, he showed up with a very fully developed worldview of how he wanted to tackle this job. So imagine, adversity creates innovation. Is that if you want to develop your creative capacity, be in a difficult situation. I mean, that's how we all grow as people, whether it's sports or economics or any field. So when he got to the Senate, he had his core team with him, and we knew how hard it was to use the rules of the House to try to downsize government. I mean, think about this as a backbencher. He was very effective, but it is really, really hard to break through and to get people's attention, to kind of win the argument and make headway. So when you have that history of adversity, you get to the Senate, and all of a sudden you have all of these new powers, these new procedural powers. And so he was like a kid at a candy store. Usually, I mean, it sounds really nerdy, but it's true. Like he was just, and we all were. We were just like, I can't believe we get to do this in the Senate. This is so exciting.
I love it. Yeah.
And it so happened that during the transition, the freshman or transition office, we shared with a guy named Barack Obama. So I was, we were in the same little basement office with Tommy Vitor, Chris Liu, Robert Gibbs, a lot of the core Obama team.
Yeah.
And as Coburn, he kind of started to cut his teeth on appropriations bills. He would actually come back on the weekend with annotated appropriations bills.
Wow.
With margins written in, and he would sort of interrogate the staff about the content of the bills. And you think that's like unheard of in today's Congress. But when you think about it, if someone runs for the job of being a legislator, that's kind of the minimum you should expect, is that they're going to read the bills that they're going to vote on.
You would think.
Have it get in the weeds and understand the content. And so when we would ask for more information, we would often have this experience where the staff of the appropriations committees, instead of sending us the version of a document that we knew they were creating, like a Word document or Excel, you could do a quick word search if you were focusing on a particular issue. They would take the step of turning those searchable documents into unsearchable PDFs. just to create a technological roadblock for us to make it hard for Coburn to understand what they were doing, to stay, so they could stay one step ahead of us in terms of transparency.
Yeah.
And that just enraged him. There's those little games that would be played, in the Senate.
Yeah.
And so that really, as we thought about, well, how do we solve this? And it's very hard to do a priori transparency where you make sure everything's visible before. Mm-hmm. It's really after things go out the door, it's easier to track. And this was happening the same time as something called the Google search engine was coming on. So we looked over the horizon and thought, if we could get all of the government spending, federal spending online as close to real time as possible, that would create permanent downward pressure on spending. We would crowdsource oversight. And again, we believe that would be absolutely in keeping with what the founders intended when they wrote transparency into the Constitution. So we had a bunch of roadblocks, a bunch of difficulty. People said you could never get all these databases to coordinate. It's impossible. And we thought, no, there's got to be a way to figure this out.
Yeah.
In order to break through, we had a lot of opposition from the Republican side. Ted Stevens put a hold on our bill. Robert Byrd did as well. So we needed star power. And so we went back to our buddy from Illinois, who was ambitious. He just gave a big speech at the Democratic National Convention.
Yeah.
And thought, let's leverage, just to be candid, and I've told him this directly, he wanted to run for president and wanted a bipartisan accomplishment. So we thought, well, what is the most conservative thing we could do with him? We tried on healthcare that I think had that worked, history would have taken a different turn. But we tried different things with Obama to try to get him to agree to something more freedom-centered, if you will. Yeah. But transparency was the one that really connected with him. And so then we had the Coburn-Obama Federal Funding Accountability and Transparency Act of 2006. So we actually have a photo of Coburn, Obama, and Henry Waxman and a few other members, House and Senate, standing around President Bush, in the old executive office building doing the signing ceremony.
Wow.
So our joke,
imagine that.
we were literally Obama's ticket to the White House.
Yeah.
And
that's awesome.
Yeah, his campaign had a lot to do with it. But,
sure. But yeah. But it was something, though, that bipartisanship of transparency, of allowing for people, whether Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, whoever, to know where the dollars are going. That's our money. That's the taxpayer money at the end of the day. That's remarkable. And I guess it helps set the stage for even some of the spending restraints, the Budget Control Act, what was it, 2010, 2011?
Exactly. Yeah.
And having the reduction in spending, like we noted in your bio from 2012 to 2013. Do you really feel like that was part of the process of just exposing kind of what DOGE is trying to do now? Y'all were DOGE basically before it was cool, it seems like.
But there were a lot of people who were DOGE before it was cool.
Yeah, true.
And it doesn't mean DOGE is cool. Well, we could talk about DOGE in a minute. But but there again, in politics, there's this recency bias where we think political history stops and starts and is recreated every 2 years. It's each election cycle is the alpha and the omega. Yeah. Political history, that's just absurd. Because the founders were deeply rooted in 2,400 years of political history. And so when I look at the Constitution, I don't see an antiquated, dusty document. I see people who had a visionary look and understanding of human psychology, human freedom. Yeah. And using the information technology they had at the time, they wrote a brilliant document. So to fast forward, so we had this bill, and again, part of the dream of the Coburn-Obama transparency bill is we wanted to create an ecosystem of groups, again, that would crowdsource oversight. We believed if you gave citizens the ability to track this data, they would do things with it that we didn't think of. That's the power of data, is that you get it out there. And that's really happened. We've seen this ecosystem mature. So Open the Books, I would argue, is the flagship organization in the transparency movement. But there are hundreds of accounts out there, like Data Republican, Mike Benz, and people may like or dislike their conclusions, but those are really valuable voices. And they're all over the spectrum of people using the data, asking questions that they have every right to ask, again, to facilitate this clash of ideas that creates better public policy. So it's really gratifying to see what Open the Books has done. But and just the reason I'm doing this now is Open the Books was founded by a guy named Adam Andrzejewski. He ran for governor of Illinois, And Adam built a beautiful organization with an incredible team, and he passed away unexpectedly at 55 just a few months ago. So the board asked me if I would take over, and initially I said, look, I'm really busy, got a lot of other projects I'm doing, but as I slept on it, I just thought like this is the right thing to do. It's an important organization, and we were part of it. Again, the kind of the intellectual architects of helping create and design a system where all of these groups and voices could be heard. And so, this happened before the election.
Yeah.
I started in November 1st, then the election happens and DOGE comes on. So it's been an incredible time, obviously, right now.
Yeah, definitely. When preparing yourself for this and working different offices, definitely with Coburn's office, you learned a lot from that. But did you already have a knack for looking at the budget, growing up and things of that nature, where you were into numbers and that sort of thing, or did it just kind of come with you?
No, I think my role, I was a comms director.
Okay, yeah.
So I think and you and I, like, we've worked in politics for a long time. Okay, so I'm the guy. If it's a group of communicators in a meeting, I'm the policy person.
Yeah.
But if it's a group of policy people, I'm definitely the communicator.
Okay.
I really admired both of those, like I play guitar. I've got, I'm sort of both analytical, and that's just how my brain has always worked. That's just who I am.
Yeah.
But really my dad, this is an important part of my story too. My dad was a FBI agent.
Okay.
If you see the movie Casino by chance,
yes,
with De Niro, Joe Pesci.
Yep.
So my dad was the lead agent in Operation Strawman.
Wow.
That the movie is based on.
Huh.
So anyway, that was a case. He was the head of the organized crime squad in Kansas City. In the late 1970s. There was a mob war happening in that era, like 77, 78. And crazy stuff like out of the movies, where people would go into pizzerias with shotguns.
Wow.
And they blew a guy up in a wheelchair. I mean, just crazy stuff that was happening.
Yeah.
So there was a mob war happening in Kansas City.
Huh.
And my dad was in charge of trying to stop it. So he set up a very elaborate system of wiretaps. He would literally go to mobsters' houses in the middle of the night, but put a surveillance bug in their car, pull it out of the driveway, put a bug in it, put it back before they woke up.
Wow.
Just really incredible thing. And so, and this is depicted in the movie, the scenes with the guys in the van with the headphones. My dad was the one orchestrating all that.
Okay.
So I grew up with, and he actually took me on a stakeout when my brother and I, this is a fun story. So I was 4, my brother was 6.
Yeah.
And he knew there was going to be there was a mobster at a hotel who was going to make a call on a payphone. They had done surveillance on him, but you couldn't have a roving wiretap. In other words, you can't just record on a public phone. So you had to have an agent on hand. So when the person picked up the phone, they could call in and say, okay, hit record. But it would look suspicious for an FBI agent just to be sitting in the lobby of a hotel for hours.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy walks in and is like, why is this guy this looks off. This looks strange.
Yeah.
So my brother and I, we were just boys goofing off.
Yeah.
Like we thought, our mom was doing something. Like, why are we at this hotel? Like, he didn't ask me. So we were cover. Like I was we were like the cover for my dad's surveillance operation.
Wow.
So anyway,
the mob guy would never think, well, he's got his kids. This is his dad.
Dad is like, he's probably letting his wife is doing something out, in the city, and who knows what's going on. But I think that investigator DNA is definitely there.
Definitely, yeah.
And that desire just to find that story, and again, I think storytelling is always like stories are Trojan horses for true ideas. Mm-hmm. That if you just bombard people with data and numbers, you're gonna lose them in about 10 seconds. Yeah. But if you tell a story, the bridge to nowhere, these iconic examples of waste, then you can start to insert some content once you have people's attention and get them to think more deeply about, again, this fundamental relationship between the state and the individual. Yeah. And that's really what all politics in the best sense is really about. It's about stewarding that power and that relationship.
Mm-hmm. And with that bridge to nowhere, right? Because everybody knows that now. I mean, even if they say something about, "Hey, I got a bridge to sell you," as a little comeback line or something, because there's a lot of things that you probably could have picked out at that time, and just in the budget today, there's a lot of stuff you could pick out. But that one made such an impact. Mm-hmm. What do you think? because I would love to learn from that, because you or I and others who are wanting to expose more of these things, how can you find that secret sauce maybe to find something like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Look, but the truth is, it was a lot of trial and error.
Yeah.
I think there were a lot of architects of that concept. It's Keith Ashdown, Steve Ellis at Taxpayers for Common Sense. I think Keith or Steve came up with the term, I think, but then we really popularized it.
Yeah.
And developed a whole strategy around it. And that strategy was you had to have, again, you can look at 1,000 line items in a budget, but you've got to find the things that tell that story, that illustrate this relationship, that raise the right questions about what is the relationship between the individual and the state? What is a good member of Congress? Is the good member of Congress the one who sends money back to the state, or the one who keeps money from leaving? And obviously we think it's the one who keeps money from leaving. And with that particular amendment, so we knew there was a compelling story where we could get photos of it. It was connecting an island to about, I don't remember, 60 something people, $230 million. But what really helped that kind of, break through was we offered the amendment right after Hurricane Katrina. And we used that to highlight this concept of opportunity cost, which, as an economics guy, you know what that is, but the average person knows it, but they don't think, oh, but that's opportunity cost. It's the choice. It's the priority. Everyone can relate to priorities in their personal life. Whereas you spend money on this, you can't spend money on that. So what we did with the amendment is we didn't just strike it. We didn't put it within, 1,000 different cuts. And I'm very skeptical, like across the board cutting. I describe that as it's easier to mow the flower bed than pull the weeds.
Yeah.
But to really be effective in politics, you have to be willing to get on your hands and knees and pull the weeds. And think of it as a dirty job. Not think of yourself as somebody important who's going to get on TV and get quoted, but really be willing to do the nitty gritty, to do the thankless, tedious hard work. And that's who Tom Coburn was fundamentally. And he demanded that from everyone on his team. So number one, it was just a culture. It was an esprit de corps of that kind of drive to be excellent, to be really served.
Yeah.
And so that was a selection of that. But it was really the fight, is we help orchestrate the fight and the contrast. And so the amendment shifted money from the bridge in Alaska to repair a bridge that was just damaged by Hurricane Katrina. So again, that gets at the opportunity cost, is we were shifting the money around. And we figured we would lose, but in some ways the loss was even a bigger gift.
Yeah.
So we lost 82 to 15. So we lost that amendment by 67 votes.
Wow.
But in the psyche of the American people, we won it by, if we didn't poll it at the time, but I'm sure the polling would be off the charts. It's a 90-10 type issue.
Yeah.
So I think that target selection is incredibly important in politics. And DOGE is getting some of that right and some of it wrong, I think, in how they're going about it. But
yeah, no, that's great. That's fantastic. And I think, because I work also with a lot of states, and states are starting to do more of this as well, look into there and find certain areas. Because I like that point that you made about the garden, because when you're pulling the weeds, if you just mow over them, you still have the weeds there that are likely to grow much faster than the grass or the other plants that are there. So that's really good. I wonder, when you're looking at the federal budget now, and when I was at the White House, at OMB, we were looking at through the budget, and we spent a lot of time, learned a lot. It gave me a quick path to learning about the federal budget as quickly as possible. And we found like $4.6 trillion in savings, which of course, as you know, that's DC talk saying we just spent less than we otherwise would. But at least we were trying. We were bringing folks in, like Russ Vought was the director at the time. We'd bring people in, the agencies, to have almost like zero-based budgeting, where we're grilling them on each particular thing. And I think that there's a big part of zero-based budgeting, performance-based budgeting, those types of things. My approach has been a little bit more macro on the side of saying, look, let's not spend more than some sort of spending limit. And then that way you can prioritize where those dollars are going to go within the budget. But to your point, though, about open the books and making more transparent, I think you've still got to start with those weeds to make sure that you don't grow, the government too fast. I already think the budget's too high and too large as it is now. So there's a lot of room to cut. But what has been your thought process now after going through this for a while and seeing the different phases of the budget and what's being tried? What are your thoughts about DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency, coming in, trying to find different areas to cut, or at least exposing those? There's going to be a lot of limitations on what they can, because at the end of the day, Congress has the power of the purse, or they should. But I wonder what your thoughts are after seeing all that and where we're at now.
Yeah, that's look, I would say on balance, I'm elated with what DOGE is doing and the fact that Elon Musk has been engaged in this. And again, backing up just
Sure.
You know this very well, but there's been 3 or 4 major efforts to look at government waste from a big system standpoint. Back in the 80s, the Grace Commission, Reagan put that together.
Yeah.
1983 report, I think 1 out of every 3 tax dollars is wasted.
Yeah.
If you extrapolate that to today's numbers, you get to that over $2 trillion a year. Okay.
Yeah.
Then you have Bill Clinton, Al Gore, quote, reinventing government, which was making government do things they shouldn't be doing probably more efficiently.
Yeah.
Not terribly impressive effort, but there has some fans and it's worth studying, looking at.
Yeah.
And then the more recent one was Simpson-Bowles. Okay.
Yeah.
So Coburn was on the Simpson-Bowles Commission after the financial crisis. And again, in the timeline, you had the transparency bill, you have the financial crisis, you have sequestration, you have the earmark moratorium, and all of these things are really part of the same 3 or 4 year history where you have a shock to the system, and you have this sober conversation where, quote, everything was on the table.
Yeah.
People were willing to talk about restructuring safety net programs, which again, I think one of the things DOGE is sort of providing an indirect proof for, in a way, is that how hard it really is to get to big numbers that have a macroeconomic impact and lower inflation without dealing with entitlements.
Yeah.
And so when politicians on either side say, we're not going to, quote, touch Social Security, like that's the big lie in Washington.
Yeah.
That by not being willing to talk about programs that were created 100 years ago, which is crazy, really. You think about these programs are 90 years old. And why would we not go and look at them and ask the same fundamental questions that we did? And I think the public is way more sophisticated on this topic than politicians give them credit for, because you can easily walk through the scenario where, like my mother-in-law lives with us. She's not wealthy. Like I worked in government most of my life. Like we're not, so we need her Social Security. Like I feel it every day.
Yeah.
I don't want Social Security to go away for people that need it, that didn't make money, didn't have the opportunity to save, but I'm also, because I've been more successful, I think I have more responsibility. Well, I would be willing to have a system where it's not so much a universal entitlement, but where it's a true safety net.
Yeah.
Is that why have we elevated this ideological goal of universal entitlements when that's really putting our national security at risk? Okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think DOGE is an opportunity that it gives you and I an opening to have this conversation to say, wow, this effort, Elon Musk, the greatest, one of the greatest tech minds, he's come up with 150, 160, and I think they could do a lot more, and without even going after, quote, the safety net stuff.
Yeah.
But it just illustrates that that's where a lot of the money is. So I think having Elon there, having his star power is so valuable that had we had Elon Musk in our corner during the Simpson-Bowles era, we would talk about this in the office too. We'd be like, gosh, why couldn't we get like a Steve Jobs or Bill Gates to really give their time and attention to this?
Yeah.
And so here we are. It's like, President Trump, he's not always the most disciplined communicator.
Right.
But you got to give him credit for being willing to make this a priority. So I think it's incredible. And even as we're going to have Elon kind of take a couple steps back, I believe that's going to give Congress and the administration and the public an opportunity to take a couple steps forward in terms of working together to unpack and understand what they've discovered and then make these changes permanent through legislation. Like there needs to be real-time transparency, which is actually a project in process. There are members looking at that. I'm relatively confident that's going to happen, because one of the deficiencies of DOGE right now is when people ask us, well, can you prove that they saved this much? And the truth is we can't, because we don't have access to the same information. And neither confirm nor deny it. And it's in their interest to help groups like ours confirm it, because we're their biggest fan. Like we want them to be wildly successful.
Yeah.
And so I'm hopeful that that's going to happen. And again, and I think to Elon's credit, when he has said things like, "Hey, we're going to make mistakes and then go back and try to fix them," what a wonderful statement of maturity and service to say that.
You don't hear that. You don't hear that in government too often.
You don't hear that very often. Well, I think again, like that's really just tremendous that he's taken that posture.
Definitely.
But again, it's really going to be Congress's time to step up.
Yeah.
And not lock in institutionalized transparency gains, but also institutionalize cuts in overall spending, but also, again, just a repurposing of government so that we reorganize federal agencies. So I testified before the DOGE subcommittee recently.
Okay.
That was in the Q&A that came up is, I was just encouraging the members to just own it, tackle it, be jealous of your power and reorganize federal agencies.
Yeah.
So it looks more like the Constitution. The Constitution.
Yeah, definitely. Were some of the items that, and help me with my understanding of this, John, because basically the way I see it is that DOGE has come in, they found certain contracts and they were able to stop some of those contracts. And so that helps with the spending for the future. There's not necessarily huge cuts that they can make right now. It's more about future spending. Is that right? What I've seen so far.
Well, I think again, that's where it's hard. It's hard for me to even answer that.
Yeah, I gotcha.
I can't confirm what's been cut and what hasn't. There's different buckets. There's things that you can probably verify through USA spending. And again, there's a 30-day delay at least.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to close that to zero in real time. But then there are cuts that are going to be challenged or are being challenged that could be reversed. There are things done through executive order that can be reversed just by executive order.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's different levels. There's different degrees of permanence, if you will.
Yeah.
And some are more ephemeral than others.
Yeah.
And we want to help them all be solid. And they do too. Like we're on the same wavelength here.
Yeah.
But as you know, it's just easier said than done.
Yeah.
And
definitely.
And it's okay just to be honest with the public and say, hey, this is really hard work.
Mm-hmm.
And even like the earmark reform, that took 12 years from 1998 to 2010.
Yeah.
Yeah. We want to see all these things happen immediately.
Yeah.
And they can. A lot of big things can happen right now. As I talk a lot about transparency cuts through government like water cuts through stone. When it finds cracks, it can wipe away mighty walls of opposition.
Yeah.
And fairly dramatic change quickly.
Yeah.
But you have to maintain that steady flow. Because you're not going to have the bridge to nowhere opportunity every time you make an effort to be specific.
Yeah, man, it's awesome. So in your perfect world, John, like you were able to look at this and would it just be like, okay, whenever they're voting on stuff and there's stuff that's going into the budget, you would have access to that information right now, so we could put it online and that people could see it, or would it be when something passes? And is signed by the president, then you put it online? Where in the process would you like to have this information available to the public?
Sure. Yeah, I think. Well, let's talk about. I think what you can do, what USA Spending did, is they looked at money expenditures. Okay, once money goes out the door, that's the first goal, is to really close that real time transparency gap. Yeah. And that's part of, again, that's a challenge for DOGE, is because they're making claims and they're saying things that even groups like ours that, I work for Tom, I want them to, again, I want them to be wildly successful. But I can't even verify a lot of what they're doing. And so that's really important, is to get, it was when money goes out the door. But then to your question of, this is the question of, there's a fine line between when you do policy making between like privacy and protecting the space to have negotiations. And you want transparency. You don't want voyeurism. You don't want to have like where there's too much insight. You want members to have the ability to actually negotiate. But but when you have a bill that's all of a sudden dropped at the last minute, and the public doesn't have the opportunity to look at it, and members don't, then that's a problem.
Yeah.
So that's more of an internal issue of the House. That's a little outside of our scope.
Okay.
Really.
Sure.
We're focused as an organization. We decided to focus more on, okay, once the money's spent, that's really where our work.
That makes sense.
This is obviously an important discussion too.
Yeah.
And just as a quick aside, this is really forward dynamic. On the left, they've lost focus of what transparency actually is.
Yeah.
So transparency is in the constitutional sense is not a two-way street. In other words, you and I, as private citizens, we have the right to inspect the government's checkbook because it's our money. The government does not have the right to inspect your checkbook.
Yeah.
That's called surveillance.
Yeah.
We don't live in an East German Stasi surveillance state.
Right.
And it's really dangerous when people on the left particularly conflate that. And, I'm in George Will's camp on campaign finance and speech. It's really, I think you should give people a lot of leeway to donate, and they can report that. But again, it's speech.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, if you want to get the money out of politics, you need to get politics out of our money. That's the only way to ever get at that.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's great. Yeah. It reminds me, as an economist, kind of bringing in some economic stuff in here. I mean, I think information is so important. And when you're looking at the market economy and exchanges that are happening that allows for prices to direct the allocation of resources where they should go. And that's what happens in a voluntary exchange. Beautiful stuff that happens, the invisible hand from Adam Smith and so forth. But from your point on the politics of it, information is so important of what's going in and out. And especially when it is our money. And so I think by doing what you're doing, you're allowing for that market equilibrium to some extent to happen within government. So that way we can do what we can in the private sector to be as productive as possible. Is that kind of how you see things?
Absolutely. That's a great way to put it. Yeah. It's really helping the body politic metabolize these debates.
Nice. Yeah.
Is you've got to have the information out there. So you let the people work their will and have the argument about, okay, I want more of this or less of that. Like we've got a little thing we wrote up on the James Webb Space Telescope and the implications on basic research. Like that's a really important public policy question of, does that displace research? Does it help it? Like those are the things we should wrestle with as a society.
Yeah.
And
definitely.
So absolutely. Yeah. Is that when the information isn't out there, when there's a fog of DOGE right now.
Mm-hmm.
And we want to kind of clear through that. We want that to want the light to come in and help them be successful.
Yeah, I hope so, John. And I love what y'all are doing. I mean, when you think about, we got $36 trillion in national debt, and we have a lot more in unfunded liabilities, over $100+ trillion. So there's a lot of problems that's going on. We have $1 trillion in net interest payments on the debt just alone.
More than defense.
More than defense, yeah. And the only one that's above it is Social Security and Medicare are the only two that we spend more on net interest. That's just as wild. And I'm hopeful that the Trump administration will use this, what Elon's done and what the DOGE is doing, and others are starting to get on this. I will say that in the first administration, Trump wasn't really interested in cutting spending or doing much of spending at all. And I have seen a change though this time. I don't know if it's politics or whatever it is, but I'm hopeful that that's the direction that we can keep going, because as you and I would probably agree on, is that we don't have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem. And we've got to get this spending problem under control, or we're going to continue to have a fiscal crisis. And I think we're kind of already in that now. We're seeing what's happening with tariffs. We're seeing what's happening with some of the other uncertainties in the economy. But if you look at interest rates and you look at other parts of our economy, this is having a direct effect on mortgage rates, on car loan rates, and everything else on Main Street, not just Wall Street. And so I think this is a big step in that direction. So I really appreciate the work that you're doing on this. Where do you see us going? From what's happening with DOGE and the Trump administration and others, and it's happening across the country as well. In Texas, where I live, they passed a DOGE bill, and so there's going to be a bit different part now of the governor's office that's going to look at different regulations and spending to try to cut back. I'm hopeful that will happen, but we're seeing kind of this revolution, if you will, across the country. So I wonder what your thoughts are. Where we're moving forward.
Yeah, Vance. I would say, I'm very optimistic about what I would call DOGE's second act.
Yeah,
like the first act is now kind of coming to an end. It's going to transition into a second act, and I think it's an opportunity again to focus on this project that I think is the most unifying presidential level priority right now in the administration. Is really what DOGE is doing. And look, you and I know a lot of people. We talked to a lot of people from all the spectrums of the conservative movement. This is the one area where I get the most consistent positive feedback. And people are divided on tariffs, they're divided on trade. I'm not a trade expert, but I would lean more in the favor of, I call it friend trade. Let's trade with our friends and allies and stop bad practices. And I think that's kind of the majority the supermajority position. And but again, and these things, very few things in politics are absolutely wrong and absolutely right. Is that they're Venn diagrams of areas of emphasis where I think we're better off. We have more growth when we have freer trade, but I understand why they're trying to lower barriers. But how that's done, obviously, is going to have a huge impact. But I really view DOGE in this effort. This is, DOGE is like a Rorschach test as well. Yeah, where people view it through their own kind of prism of what they want it to be. And so there are different. Some people view DOGE as an opportunity to defeat the deep state or to change how we position ourselves internationally. But I view it more as elevating individual freedom and tackling this 100-year progressive project of growing the administrative state. And that, again, going back to the opportunity cost, the linkage between state power, government power, every dollar saved in Washington is a dream realized somewhere in America. Yeah. Because you're shifting the capacity. Instead of growing federal agencies, we're trying to grow the agency of individual Americans. Yeah. Let them pursue happiness on their terms with their resources. That focus is overwhelmingly popular and it's effective. It actually works. Whereas a lot of the tariff trial and error is messy right now. It could get more messy. Yeah. But what we're talking about with DOGE and taking a look at the 100-year project and bringing it back more in line with the founder's vision, that is the best way to beat China. Yeah. We're not going to beat China by becoming China. We're going to beat China by making sure we have the most vibrant, creative, growing economy in human history. And you do it by getting rid of a lot of the idiocy within the federal government. Yep. Yeah, there shouldn't be any sacred cows. To your point earlier about the quote unquote entitlements, but I don't really think we're entitled to anything. But we called it mandatory spending. I think is what in the budget. But those things have to be on the table as well. And from my more classical liberal view, I mean, I would love to see the budget shrink dramatically, but I don't see that happening right away. But if we can have more economic growth and just slow the spending, to some level. I like population inflation, but whatever you want it to be, if we just slow spending, we could balance the budget within a few years. I mean, that's really a lot what they did in the late 90s under Clinton and everything else, and the Republican Revolution that was happening there, and Gingrich and others was slowing the growth of spending and putting in welfare reforms and some other things that were happening. I'm hopeful that could be another part of this DOGE process. Right. Yeah, and Vance, I would encourage the administration too to focus on amplification and multiplier type cuts. Where and we did a big study of all federal agencies and found that the number of employees really hasn't increased dramatically, even when you factor in playing games by outsourcing and all that. The increase is all spending. So like Department of Education, the growth rate was flat relatively the past 25 years. But 750% growth like that in terms of spending. So we have a spending problem, and I'm in favor of downsizing personnel, but that doesn't really get at the budget savings. That's true. But what you should do is focus on things like EPA and energy, where if we have better permitting, you do National Environmental Policy Act reform, you get rid of some of the fat and bloat within EPA. And then you start to have better energy policy. And Chris Wright is phenomenal at Department of Energy. Yes. He sees the big picture here. And when you have cheaper energy is the master resource. Everything becomes more affordable. Yeah. And you deal with inflation. So that's, in politics, you always want to reinvest your political capital. You want to always be kind of winning and growing your ability to do bigger and bigger things. Yeah. And that's why the target selection is so important, is that sometimes they haven't invested the time. They've moved so quickly, they haven't consolidated their own victories. Yep. And that's where having different eyes and different voices kind of being a part of the conversation is helpful. Again, Elon, I think, is asking for that. He's doesn't have a chip on his shoulder at all. Again, that's how you really are effective. And in the private sector, no one has time for games. You just do the best you can and try to be excellent. So That's right. Well, John, it's really been a pleasure talking with you. We could talk about this all day, so I have to have you back on sometime. But I think this is a great step to letting people prosper. The name of the show is to highlight what's going on with our money, with our taxpayer dollars. As you put it, the trade-off is it's not in our pocket, it's in their pocket, it's in government's pocket, probably being wasted in many capacities.
And so I think it's so important. I'll make sure to put this on the show notes page as well. But God bless you. And thank you for all you're doing, John. And I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Great. Thanks, Vance. Appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure. And for the audience, I hope you enjoyed this discussion. We need to keep shining the light on how government is spending our money, whether it's at the federal level, state level, local level, wherever it's at. We need to know where that money is going. And I'm going to keep trying to bring more of that discussion to you so you can hear this each and every week. Remember, you can find all this information at vanceginn.com or go to my Substack, vanceginn.substack.com for all the show notes and a lot more. And we've got a lot more coming up here soon. So until next time, God bless you and let people prosper.